Hey everyone, welcome to Politicy. We're very excited to showcase our very first video on the channel. So anyways, good day to you all. My name is Rayhan Chaudhary, and if you some of the viewers don't know this channel, so basically Politicy24 is a political podcast where we allow you all the viewers, particularly those who are younger viewers, to be able to understand politics without the intense passions presented in the mainstream media, as well as to be able to analyze the effects that those policies from the politics has on your daily lives. And particularly today we'd be focusing on the aspects of the American melting pot and our proud diversity, which allows us to be of such because of immigration, which brings us to today's topic, which will be immigration in America. So we'd be focusing on the various proposals for immigration reform that are being actively discussed in Washington, and as I said, how they would affect your lives in terms of connecting to immigration. So before I start the video, I'd like to say I particularly have personal stake in this issue as well, since my family being able to come over here has been thanks to the large complexities of immigration law, whether that meant my grandmother coming over here through visa sponsorship or my mom from a spousal application for a green card, which both now are grateful citizens of this country. So anyways, not only in my family is immigration a big issue, but at large in my community and in the country at large as well. So we see this particularly with illegal immigrants that have been coming over to this country recently, as well as various refugees, which we see with Trump administration's decision to enact ICE raids to arrest illegal immigrants, as well as their recent negotiations with Guatemala limiting asylum entries into the United States. So basically they made it harder to apply for asylum by making it that you have to apply to asylum only in the United States and cannot do it from their respective locations, which, as we know, the target and intent of that was to reduce immigration to this country from the Central American regions for these illegal immigrants, so to disincentivize them from coming over, which, as you know, is an issue that is very controversial depending on the side that you're on, whether you're a Democrat or whether you're a Republican. It's a very controversial issue since they all have different views, which will be discussed in my partner's Edward video when he discusses the political side of it. But anyways, as I've already said, immigration is a very long and controversial subject to talk about. So before I start, I want you guys to check out the various views on the issue, and from both sides, of course, so you'll be able to see where we are. And I'm going to continue on by discussing the history of immigration through many centuries back from the founding time today, so you'll be able to understand. So anyways, like I said, before I start, let's check out the two sides on this issue and see where they stand. And some of the issues they do discuss will be covered later in the video. Okay, ready? Here we go.
Has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems. Thank you. It's true.
So this, as you can see, is
and
a
these
clip
are the best and the finest.
President Trump's
when Mexico
initial
sends its
speech
people,
on
they're
Mexican
not sending
immigrants.
their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. But I speak to border guards, and they tell us what we're getting. And it only makes common sense. It only makes common sense. They're sending us not the right people. It's coming from more than Mexico. It's coming from all over South and Latin America, and it's coming probably from the Middle East. But we don't know, because we have protection, and we have no competence. We don't know what's happening, and it's got to stop.
So now you saw the side from President Trump and his current administration's approach, and now we're going to show you the ones from the Democratic side of this issue.
We would not turn back Valeria and her father, Oscar.
We
would accept them into this country and follow our own asylum laws. We would not build walls. We would not put kids in cages. In fact, we would spare no expense to reunite the families that have been separated already.
Congressman,
and we
your
would not
policy
criminally
would still
prosecute
criminalize
any
them
family
because
who
your
is
policy
fleeing
doesn't call
violence
for the repeal
and
of Section
persecution.
1325.
We would make sure
Secretary, let him finish, and I will give you.
His policy
but
would
let him
criminalize
finish. Let him
a lot of
finish,
these
please.
folks.
Yes.
We would not detain any family fleeing violence, in fact, fleeing the deadliest countries on the face of the planet today. We would implement a family case management program so they could be cared for in the community at a fraction of the cost. And then we would rewrite our immigration laws in our own image, free dreamers forever from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens here in this country, invest in solutions in Central America, work with regional stakeholders so there's no reason to make that 2,000-mile journey to this country.
Secretary, I'll give you 30 seconds.
Let's be very clear. The reason that they're separating these little children from their families is that they're using Section 1325 of that act, which criminalizes coming across the border, to incarcerate the parents and then separate them. Some of us on this stage have called to end that section, to terminate it. Some, like Congressman O'Rourke, have not. And I want to challenge all of the candidates to do that. I just think it's a mistake, Bethel. I think it's a mistake. And I think that if you truly want to change the system, then we got to repeal that section. If not, then it might as well be the same policy.
Let me respond to this very briefly. Actually, as a member of Congress, I helped to introduce legislation that would ensure that we don't criminalize those who are seeking asylum and refuge in this country. If you're fleeing desperation, then I want to make sure that you're treated with respect.
I'm still talking about everybody else.
But you're looking at just one small part of this. I'm talking about a comprehensive rewrite of our immigration laws. And if you do that, I don't think it's asking too much for people to follow our laws.
I'm talking about millions of folks. A lot of folks that are coming are not seeking asylum. A lot of them are undocumented immigrants. And you said recently that the reason you didn't want to repeal Section 1325 was because you were concerned about human trafficking and drug trafficking. But let me tell you what, Section 18, Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Title 21, and Title 22 already cover human trafficking and drug trafficking. I think that you should do your homework on this issue. If you did your homework on this issue, you would know that we should repeal this section.
This is an issue that we should and could.
And such, and while Julian Castro has emphasized the incarceration of these illegal immigrants. So you can see they've discussed various predicaments that have come with this issue, which, as I've said, will be discussed soon. Okay, so now you've been able to see both sides and what they think about this issue. Now it's time to, as I said, go back 250 years to go to the founding of this country and see how this issue has come up to how it has come today. So, okay, now we're going to start with President John Adams. So basically, in 1797, President John Adams signed a series of acts known as the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798, which basically made it harder for immigrants to vote. It made them have to wait 14 years to vote, and also the ability to easily deport them from the country, which of course was due to the lingering tensions in Europe. As you can see, during the time of 1800 circa Europe, there were a lot of conflicts, particularly among Great Britain and France, who the United States tried to stay away from their conflicts because they wanted to be isolated from Europe, which is called isolationism, and that is a big player in U.S. foreign policy for the first 150 years. So basically, America wants to stay away from the rest of the world and not be dragged into these European conflicts. And in this case, it's a conflict between, as I said, the European powers of France and the United Kingdom, but particularly with France and Napoleon. So basically, Napoleon, a brief summary of Napoleon, he's basically a dictator who overthrew the French, who was part of the French Revolution that overthrew their monarch, and also instigated a series of actions to try to invade Europe, and that got into whole other complexities, which I will not mention to discuss today. So, just a short summary, America wanted to stay away from Europe in general, and this is why they tried to make it harder for people to immigrate for this reason. And the Alien Sedition Acts were not only involved with immigration, but they also involved with limiting freedom of speech, dissent, and other such, which refers to the sedition aspects of this law. Anyways, it was so controversial in our country, it split up the, I guess you could say, the unity that we had in the early Washington years, which though wasn't really unified. But anyways, because of their conflicts between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. But anyways, this caused John Adams to lose his election in 1800 against Thomas Jefferson. And as I've said, and the biggest factor in his loss was the Alien and Sedition Acts, along with other factors such as the X, Y, and Z scandal. But that, again, is not really relevant to the situation. Actually, it kind of is, because the X and Y and Z scandals basically when John Adams tried to have an intervention in the French conflict, and that went very unsuccessfully and turned out to be a scandal. So this is one of the other reasons why America tried to be isolationist in itself. So anyways, immigration really did become an issue again till later on with the Chinese immigrants that came over during the height of the Industrial Revolution, which we all know was a time when our country had a rapid expansion westward, which you can see with the railroad being built from east to west and then being connected with the country, which is why it was called the Transcontinental Railroad. So anyways, from the eastern side, you had Irish immigrants building the railroad from the east, and from the west, we have the Chinese immigrants building the railroad, as I've said. So basically, the Chinese immigrants were heavily discriminated upon because they were not white, did not fit into the definition of quote-unquote being an American, and that caused the reason for their prejudice, which I'll discuss more in detail later on the whole aspect of how white supremacy has impacted immigration in respect. So anyways, that was the first major reason. And underlying reason they used also was the fear of job loss, because they would be taking over the jobs of native employees, which you can see still has an impact today with the rhetoric being presented on the anti-immigration sides on how the immigrants, the migrants from Central and South America, as well as other places of the world, are quote-unquote taking away their jobs. So this issue still lingers, just with different players. And anyways, they were not the only Asian group to be discriminated heavily upon. Also, the Japanese workers were also, because they thought they were taking away their jobs in terms of the agriculture sector, which we see with the Japanese sugar plantation workers in Hawaii, California, and such, although which was an also similar factor to the Chinese, like I said, because the natives thought, well, not natives, I mean, the American people, not the American people, but the American government, particularly driving their narrative, thought that these workers would also take away native jobs because of the reason of their low wage pay. So basically, importing foreign labor was cheaper than employing domestic American workers, which was a driving factor for both Chinese and Japanese immigration. So anyways, the Japanese immigration issue resulted with the Gentleman's Act in 1907, brokered under President Theodore Roosevelt, who negotiated a though non-binding, they enforced an agreement that halted and limited Japanese immigration to this country in the year 1907. And not only have and this is an image of Ellis Island, which I'll be getting to in a second. So anyways, not only are immigrants being restricted from the Asian side, but they also want to restrict it from the Eastern European and Southern European side. So now you'd ask, well, why would they want to ban Eastern and Southern European immigration? Aren't those quote-unquote white people? Actually, not really, since back in the early 20th century, the thought of being white was only limited to Northern European Protestants. And since the Southern Europeans and Eastern Europeans from Italy, from Lithuania, Italy, Lithuania, Russia, and other places were not of Protestant background, Italy particularly faced heavy discrimination because of their Catholicism and such. So the Catholicism and such, which I'll be discussing soon. So anyways, as I said earlier, this is a picture of Ellis Island, which is where many of the immigrants came from into this country. I just wanted to include an image of that because it's important to mention this, because this was the start of where their rough and difficult journey and the living experience in the United States began. Since when they first came here, they had poor medical, like they had to go through rigorous medical tests. They had to go through so many other barriers before they'd be able to come in here. Although almost all made it, only a small 2% were deported. This was the start for the difficult assimilation process for their lives in the United States, which is riddled with discrimination, prejudice, and also with the language barrier that caused such. Okay, next slide. So this shows, as I talked about earlier, how the Italians particularly were heavily discriminated upon because of their Catholic faith. Many of them, many people in this country and the American government as well, thought that these people were, as I said, inferior because of their Catholicism and also because of their skin complexion. Though Italians are of you today would think white skin. If you look a little deeper, it's a little less white. It's a little more brown. Your Mediterranean skin complexion, which back in the early 20th century did not fit the prototypical white Northern European outlook. So this was basically, you see, a cartoon where you'd see people trying to beat up the Italians and ways to try to fend them off from the country, way to torture them, way to hurt them. And a big advocate of such was the KKK. This is Red Scare, sorry, that will be a little later. So the KKK, well, a minute, let me go back here. KKK, yep, KKK. And the KKK believed that because of their Catholicism, there would be allegiance to Rome, and since they weren't white anyways, they could be discriminated upon. And the KKK were basically, as you already know, they discriminated heavily against African Americans, Mexican Americans, and other minority groups. However, they also particularly hit on people who were of Catholic background as well. And not only Catholic background, actually people who were of Jewish backgrounds, because of their minded of Jewish conspiracy that they would take over the finance, which, as you see, a lingering part of anti-Semitism, which unfortunately is still persistent in our society today. And this culminated in their influence and domination in, I guess you could say, the atmosphere, political atmosphere at the time, which you can see, which is the 1925 march and rally on Washington that they had to exalt and demonstrate their white supremacy, which also they had another one in 1920, but this one's been 1925 after the 1924 Immigration Act was passed. So before I go into that, I'm also going to go briefly into the Red Scare, which was an important part in trying to scare away immigrants and trying to have a hostile nativist kind of background. And for those viewers who don't know what nativism is basically fear of other nations, and like basically favoring those who are at home, and they considered that of particularly of white people. Again, at that point of time, they didn't consider African Americans an integral part of the United States. They were just exclusively keeping it to the quote-unquote white people who, of course, had Northern European complexions. And the discrimination made it even harder for many of these immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe to assimilate into this country. And like I said, another part that made this whole problem was the Red Scare. The Red Scare was basically a time when there was hysteria. There's actually two Red Scares. One was the first Red Scare between 1918 and 1920, and second in the 1950s, which I'm not going to touch much upon right now. Maybe I'll do it later, I'm not sure. But anyways, the Red Scare of 1918 and 1920 was basically after the midst of the Bolshevik Revolution, which, as many of you know, was the time when the Soviet Union was overthrown from power. Not Soviet, I apologize. I mean, the Russian Empire was overthrown from power, and Tsar Nicholas was overthrown, and the Soviets, the communists, the Bolsheviks, took over and formed the Soviet Union. I'm sorry about that whole misstep a minute back, but anyways, so basically, yeah, after the communists took over, many in the United States were fearful that communism would infiltrate our country, and the hatred of communists were such that they even had a flag here the flag, you can't see the logo, but the flag logo is basically saying we would never take red, we're always going to be blue and white. I don't think you can see it right now because it's shrunk, but that's what basically the image was supposed to show. So yeah, that basically culminated in the fear against immigrants added to the Red Scare, considering that they thought many immigrants, because this communist revolution occurred in Russia and the areas near to Eastern Europe, they thought that these immigrants, like I said, would bring communism and also, as well, anarchy into this country, which because of the disturbances that this fearful environment caused, resulted in the Wall Street bombing of 1920, which you can see resulted in many casualties in this horrifying incident. So anyways, not only that, but it also resulted in the arrest of many innocent immigrants, thousands, about, I believe, many thousand citizens, I believe it's 4,000, one number I saw, but many people. But anyways, this culminated in one of the more higher profile cases, which resulted in Sacco and Vanzetti. If you paid attention in your history class, many, hopefully you have, but if not, Sacco and Vanzetti were basically two anarchists accused of murdering someone, basically, and then the way that their trial was conducted was very biased against them because of their political affiliation of their anarchy. Which, by the way, anarchism is not the same as communism, but people like to overlap and put the two together. Just, they were basically a symbol of immigrants infiltrating American culture in a way. That's basically what it was, which is what they had them overlap together. So anyways, since I said their trial was conducted in a biased way and they were convicted and sentenced to death and killed, however, 50 years later, 1976, I believe, but somewhere in the 1970s, they were pardoned by the governor of Massachusetts. So the outcasts, not the outcasts, their justice was served to them over 50 years ago. So as you've been seeing so far in American history, though, the aspirational values of the American dream of no discrimination against nationality, religion, political affiliation, as you've seen, those are all thrown to the side, unfortunately, in the immigration debate, which results in the very tense environment into this issue, which you can see today. And a big part, like I said, I'm going to include is also the fact of white supremacy and the white backlash that somehow ensured. And not only, like I said, not only were societal concerns a big part, but also, like I said, economic anxieties are a big part. They fear that immigrations, the Chinese, Japanese, not only them, but the other immigrants, like I mentioned earlier, Irish immigrants as well. They thought that all these immigrants from all the countries that they came from would result in job loss to the domestic population. So, as you see, with all of this has just tainted in our history, unfortunately. But that's basically what and how it has shaped our things. And this has continued, particularly with the treatment of Japanese in World War II with internment camps. I haven't included any images of that for the sake of not being directly related to immigration. However, that is a reflection of how how at the time the American dream was deeply tainted by these various anxieties that were present in the country. Okay. Let's see. I think this slide is, yes, this slide is done. Oh, anyways, no, sorry, it's not done. Anyways, all of this that has occurred has, like I said, culminated into the 1921 Emergency Quota Act, however expanded upon and finalized with the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924. It all culminated into the signature of law by by Calvin Coolidge, President Calvin Coolidge at the time, which basically limited immigration from Southern and Eastern European countries, which the result of which was very great, which we see it also included Japanese ban. So it basically codified the gentleman's agreement into legally binding law as well. So as you see, the impact of immigration was great, since this result has been showing the rapid decrease of immigrants coming to the United States from those areas. You can see from Italy, Romania, Turkey, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Austria. So basically Eastern European countries as well. You can see Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania have rapidly decreasing numbers of immigrants coming to this country. So basically, you can see the results of this act, the number of immigrants that have come over, which is rapidly diminished after the law was passed. And this is shown even by a better graph, which shows the red being those who come from Northern Europe and blue from Southeastern Europe. So basically, the Southeastern one was continuously increasing over time until after 1924, when it had a reversal. Although in the bottom it's not clear, the chart shows that the Southeastern European immigration population, in the terms of them immigrating to the United States, declines because of this act. Okay, so that was basically the atmosphere for immigration from the founding of our country till 1924. However, sorry, this is going to come later. So basically, this is 86. Okay, here we go. So basically, that was all till 1924, and not only 1924, all until 1965, which we finally have a reversal in the trends of how our immigration policy is shaping our country. By 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson signs the Immigration Nationality Act of 1965, which ends quotas in terms of how many immigrants can come over, which was big part of the 1924 Immigration Act, which I forgot to mention earlier. So it ended quotas, and if you don't know what quotas are, in any people in my audience, quotas are basically limits in the number of people that can come over. So they had quotas on how many people can come over from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe in particular, which is why you saw the decrease in numbers. So anyways, back to 1965. So basically, it ended all these quotas and opened immigration to many countries in the world, particularly those in the developing world, which we see with Africa, many African and Asian countries, which is why you see the influx of all these immigrants coming from that section of the world after 1965. Before 1965, you don't really see as many immigrants coming from Africa and Asia. There are from Asia, particularly what I mean, like India, particularly China. China, no, they restricted Chinese immigration, Japanese immigration as well. So from beforehand, so you don't really see people from that side of the world come over. Like I've said before, you saw the Chinese and Japanese came, but they were banned, of course, so you haven't seen them in the past 50, 100 years come over to the United States. So after 1965, those people were finally allowed to come to the United States, and those people mean particularly those who are of highly skilled, highly educated, though not all were highly skilled and highly educated, but most of them who came over were highly skilled and highly educated. They came for economic opportunities, just like their immigrants in the past that came over this country. A common theme that still resides in one of the purposes of immigration into this country. So, as you know, people coming over is a great thing, yay. We get add more people to the American dream and all. However, at the same time, not only would people come from that part of the world, but also from Central and South America, which was a good thing also. However, the immigrants that came from Central and South America were not legal. They weren't legally coming in here. They were coming in here, but they weren't through legal means. So many came from Mexico, particularly to become migrant workers. As you see, this is a picture from the 60s. For many were working in grape farms, many fruit farms. They were a very prominent sector of people that came over here for farming, in particular in agriculture fields. And then they were hired because, like I said earlier, a big theme in immigration is the fact that foreign labor is cheaper than domestic labor, which is a concern that people in the past had with Chinese and Japanese immigrants. So that's the reason why many you can say moguls, or you can say many agricultural farmers, like big farmers in particularly, big as of like big like dominant farmers in the agriculture industry hired these workers to work it, and this, as I said, continued into the 60s and 70s as well, with workers continuously coming into the country, and that caused a rapid increase of illegal immigration into the 70s and 80s and 90s. So this became an issue for the security of our border, and that culminated into the result of the 1980s, as you can see in the picture, culminated the result in 1986 Act signed by President Ronald Reagan, which basically gave amnesty to, I believe, 2 to 3 million illegal immigrants in return for security trying to address border issues. Though the act gave the amnesty portion, the border security portion wasn't really a big enforced as much. But however, as we see, this is later on addressed in the coming decades. However, the result of the border enforcement provisions not being enforced resulted in rapid increase of illegal immigration from the 80s to the end of the 90s, though that trend slowly slows down incrementally over time until the recent bump you see in the news currently today because of the current administration's policies, and of not their policies, but more of the atmosphere of fear reemerging because of their policies. But that's another topic that I'll discuss later on in this video. So anyways, like you can see, the next US-Mexican border has in the 80s looked very insecure. There was not a lot of fencing and barriers. It was very easy to come through this country and such. So it caused concerns for security, as during that time, as you know, with the drug wars as well, many drugs were able to come into this country's gangs moved up here, and cartels are able to operate. Like we see MS-13 started in Los Angeles, though they have connection to drug cartel ties back in El Salvador. And it's important to mention this because the refugees that came here from Central and South America, though some came from economic reasons, and unlike in Asia and in Africa where they did primarily come for economic reasons, the ones that came from Central and South America were political refugees, which we see in this image of immigrants coming, of I believe Cuban immigrants coming over. No, Nicaraguan immigrants. Yeah, these are Nicaraguan migrants. I had a picture of Cuban immigrants, I didn't include here, but of Nicaraguan migrants escaping the wars in Central America, which during the late 70s into the 80s was plagued by many wars, as we see with the Contras in Nicaragua, which hence commenced the Iran-Contra scandal into that country. So basically, that came about with the various wars in the region by the various authoritarian dictatorship figures. And not only that, but once again, communism was also a big part, as we see with Fidel Castro in Cuba, with his regime in place, and that caused I believe more than 1 million Cubans to come over here to the United States through a policy called wet and dry foot. So many of you haven't heard of that policy, but may have not have. But anyways, the wet and dry policy was basically a policy where Cuban immigrants were allowed to come, like if they came by boat to the United States, they were signaled that they were allowed to enter and they would not be restricted upon, and given refugee, which helped bolster the United States in that terms for the Cold War, being a protector of liberty, quote-unquote liberty, against the tyranny of communism and other dictatorial forces around the world. So so the aspect of political refugees against communism, I would say one of the few exceptions that we've had in terms of leniency in immigration when it has come, like the United States have been very lenient when it's come in terms of coming of refugees from communist countries, like we see with many Vietnamese refugees coming over. Like I said, Cubans coming over, some Eastern European ones to an extent, not really many, but primarily from the central, as I've said, the Central and South American regions of the world. Okay, so that covers that. So now we have come into today's day with all the context and knowledge of the past. We come to today. So as you can see here is the modern day scene and proposals. I'm just going to show you some of them, but anyways, start here. So anyways, to deal with the various flaws and I guess the mishaps of immigration proposal, we've not as a country not been able to form a final solution due to the political clash from the two political parties, as I've said in the earlier part of the video, have very different approaches to immigration that they would take. So basically, the last major effort to try to pass immigration legislation was in 2013, where the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, Immigration Modernization Act of 2013 was passed. It was basically a compromise between the two sides. The Democrats and Republicans were able to make various compromises on the bill, as we say, in the balance between enforcement and compassion. So they would allow for some leniency towards the illegal immigrants while at the same time trying to upheld some sort of accountability towards the issue. So the four major things that this bill covered, the four major issues that this bill addressed, was border security measures, where they would find in provisions to try to further secure the border more, like they had increased border fencing, increased number of border patrols and other technologies and infrastructures that are needed to secure a border. And then the second aspect of it is streamlining the immigration and visa process regulation, so they would make it a change towards how the visa and immigration process works. So a major part of that was for them to implement the merit-based system of immigration, so basically a point-based system where people would come in this country based on a determined amount of factors, which I will discuss in brief more detail in a few minutes, as well as some other procedural changes in the way immigration applications and other cases and requests, particularly for like asylum and other things, are handled. So the third and fourth major things was for them to reform the agricultural guest worker program, and with them adding legal requirements. So now this is a very important thing to consider, because as I've said in numerous times in the past in history with concerns of the Japanese, Chinese immigrants, well, those were anxieties, but it comes towards a general theme in history where even you can say the immigrants that came from New York, like the Italians and Irish and German and so forth. So with these immigrants coming over here, you see a common theme of cheap foreign labor. As I said earlier, that importing foreign labor is cheaper than employing domestic labor. So basically, this situation caused many employers, particularly like I said earlier, just a few minutes ago, you can see employers of migrant workers in the agricultural industry, like states like California, Texas, etc. So basically, these agricultural powerhouses, they wanted to employ cheap labor, and these cheap labor in those areas were of illegal immigrants, particularly. So a way to safeguard against that was to employ a series of e-verify system, which would basically target and penalize employers that do such actions. So the intent of which, of course, you would know, would be ultimately the protection of domestic workers and their concerns for job security. Considering at the time in 2013, we just came out of the midst of the Great Recession, so economic anxiety was, of course, the foremost issue at the time, which also is still an issue today, even so. But however, despite all the compromises that were made, it wasn't a bill that did not placate the immigration hardliners, which resulted in its failure, as the immigration hardliners were concerned about how some provisions in the bill would be seen as amnesty, or them ultimately being a pathway to citizenship. So they thought that this bill would lead towards an eventual pathway to citizenship, which many immigration hardliners did not approve. And this was more of a concern that House of Representatives were, much of the members were more conservative leaning in terms of their representation. Although the Senate did have conservative Republicans, though the Republicans in the House were more conservative due to it's just the way that how the House and Senate work. It's just their various mechanism why that is such. But anyways, in the Senate, but it will stall in the House due to concerns of immigration hardliners. So because all the complications that have come from immigration during the years of the Obama administration, President Barack Obama passed an executive order known as DACA and also DAPA, which is basically deferred action for childhood arrivals and deferred action for parental arrivals, I believe. So basically that gave prosecutorial discretion not to go after those immigrants. It gave them certain exceptions and being able to live in this country without the fear of being deported and being able to live the way they can. Nevertheless, DACA and DAPA both themselves faced legal challenges in terms of their constitutionality, which basically means based on the fact that they may not be constitutional. So basically, the two arguments for pro, they are constitutional, and against, that they're not constitutional. So basically, the argument that the Democrats used, who were in favor of DACA and DAPA, was basically that the Constitution allows this because of the amnesty provision granted to the executive branch, where they are allowed to, quote, according to the U.S. Constitution itself, grant reprises and pardons for offenses against the United States. So basically that says that anyone who commits crimes against the United States can be pardoned by the president, which in this case they thought, since illegal immigrants came into this country, again, not legally, which is against the rules, that it would fit this description. And the other argument here, however, is that this is not a correct approach, considering that the fact these illegal immigrants are not citizens, so thus it does not apply a non-citizen approach, and the fact that also, since this was an executive order enacting a program itself, that it's out of its reach, considering the fact that the legislative branch only conducts laws, like creates the law, while the executive branch, of course, executes it. So they thought that in this case, it would mean that DACA was created and enforced. DACA and DAPA were both created and enforced by the executive branch, which they saw conflicted with the separation of powers in the Constitution. So, however, challenged by the Trump administration, though in Trump v. Hawaii, the courts upheld the provision of DACA. Though DAPA was overruled in 2015 for legal reasons, though DACA was not, and was held as constitutional, which thus has DACA as the only, one of the ones that remained. So basically, the act that failed in 2013, like as I mentioned earlier, the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, Immigration Modernization Act, many saw that as a compromise between the values of enforcement and compassion, which you can see the themes between the two parties, which I'm not going to go very much into the politics of it, but basically the two themes that we see is the compassion, like Democrats feel concern and for the state of the migrants, that they want them to come over from safety and the havoc and dangers from their homeland, Central South America, like I've mentioned earlier, and the fact that Republicans have emphasized the importance of keeping our borders secure, which, as you saw in the earlier image, I've showed you the border pictures of the 1980s. So basically, back then, the borders weren't very secure, which is why they felt it's a problem. They still don't think it's secure completely, But however, the lack of proper adequate border security in the past, as like I said, resulted in drugs, cartels, illegal guns coming over to the country, and also bringing over gang members, which like I said, like such as MS-13, which formed domestically here in the United States in Los Angeles, though its power and influence was greatly, I guess, helped upon by the forces coming down from Central America and El Salvador, like I said. And because of the lack of border security and the fact that it allowed for these influences to come through here, it caused turmoil and plague in the inner cities during the 80s and 90s of the drug war era, and unfortunately caused many deaths because of the drug overdoses that these cartel gangs were bringing over here. So both sides have an important aspect that they bring here, compassion enforcement. So we want to be compassionate. At the same time, we want to keep our borders safe, which are two important concerns. However, though we haven't had any successful efforts so far, I'm going to briefly discuss some of the efforts that have been brought upon by the two parties, like I've already mentioned, DACA and DAPA under Barack Obama. And also there is, as I said, the border wall. Trump's proposal to build a border wall, which we can see as the Republicans' ethos of enforcement. They want to protect the border further, though Democrats have a concern of it being unnecessary and not needed due to the advent of technology and border patrol agents. They don't see it as necessary, and they think that current border fencing is adequate. But anyways, that is one of the proposals and has caused controversy, which you saw in the initial video of President Trump being a reason why he called the immigrants coming over here, of them bringing drugs, crimes, and him saying bringing over rapists. Though the characterization can be debated upon the two sides, basically the narrative of that is being due to lack of inadequate safety measures at the border. He believed building a border wall would alleviate such concerns one way. And another proposal under the Trump administration is implementing something called merit-based immigration. If some of you viewers don't know what merit-based immigration is, so basically merit-based immigration is when immigrants would be able to come over here if they meet a series of criteria, which are called points. So basically they would have to have certain criteria in terms of their work experience, language, age, education, academic, like various things, like their academic achievement or such achievement that they have in their home country. The goal of such policy is try to bring in over skilled immigrants. As I mentioned earlier, a lingering concern many have is the fact that the immigrants coming over from some regions have brought upon the advent of cheap labor, and that undercutting competition with domestic workers because of the fact that they can pay those workers low wages is a concern that they're trying to stem by being able to bring higher skilled workers here rather than the one of lower skilled workers. It would secure vital jobs, particularly those in the manufacturing sector, for domestic workers in the United States. That again can be debated. However, that's basically the premise. As I've said, the premise of such a proposal is trying to bring high-skilled immigrants and indirectly trying to actually limit the numbers, which I didn't mention earlier. So basically, since you have these barriers for immigration to come over here, it would make it harder for immigrants to come here, which acts as an indirect deterrent, which Democrats decry as this being hypocritical because of the fact that since the American dream should be an opportunity for everyone, not only those who are of skills. And we can see that in many immigrants that came throughout history, whether the early Chinese, early Japanese, early Eastern European, Southern European, even in fact Northern European. Many weren't really skilled, didn't come as skilled workers. Many came working in the factories, in the midst of factories, in the midst of the Gilded Age, a time where workers faced very precarious conditions, and which such brings that. So, anyways, that's the proposal of point-based immigration, and the Democrats have the Dream Act, which is why I have Dreamers. So basically, the Democratic proposal of the Dream Act is of trying to give a pathway to citizenship to all illegal immigrants in the United States, so they would be able to assimilate in society and be productive members of society, and that the Democrats feel like this is a way to try to bring upon them. And this proposal actually has been proposed for many years. In fact, I believe it began in 2001. Like, it's been introduced in various Congresses, though, as I said, to no avail, since the recent action on immigration has been very stalled. And additional proposal that the Democrats have is also repealing the Section 1325 of the immigration code, which the video I showed you earlier of Julio Castro and Beto O'Rourke, they were debating over, since it decriminalized border crossing. So to get more in depth of that debate, so basically that debate was showing the division between compassion and enforcement, and the degree of what compassion and enforcement as well, since the internal division in the Democratic Party also shows such, like, even though by decriminalizing border crossings you'd be able to allow, I guess, an easier time for these migrants to come over without them being subject to, I guess, various conditions, with Julio Castro emphasizing the fact that by not decriminalizing border crossings, they'd be effectively sending the parents of the children to jail, which can cause various family stress and many other disturbances within the lives of these migrants. And considering the fact that these migrants did escape from very horrible conditions in their home countries, like I said, the presence of political repression, like gangs, many other, like gangs, political repression, economic struggles, since unemployment in Central America has been lingering for some time. So the various factors by him deemed them to be, you try to make them easier for them to come into this country. So the concern that Beto O'Rourke had when it came to opposition of this is the fact that his concern, like I said earlier, was human trafficking. Human trafficking in itself is an important concern because of the fact, like I mentioned earlier in history, with the fact that drugs, cartels, illegal guns, all of those were able to come through, and that resulted in, like I said, the struggles in the inner cities in the 80s, for example, like I mentioned. So basically, his concern also comes to the treatment of these migrants. Like, if we don't, like, by not decriminalizing it, we're allowing ourselves to be able to, quote unquote, catch the traffickers themselves, since they every year the statistics are very grim. However, the amount of illegal immigrants having to come through these way mechanisms are very pretentious. So basically, his concern of protecting the welfare of immigrants while being able to also catch the traffickers themselves who bring these immigrants. So his thing is, by decriminalizing it, we pave the way for less accountability for those who traffic these migrants. So anyways, last thing I forgot to mention was the Democrats' last proposal of also giving free health care to illegal migrants. So recently, if you watch the Democratic debates, almost all of them, and Joe Biden have raised his hand, but basically him included, raised their hand. They would give free healthcare to illegal migrants. So basically, their reason was that by doing such, we would protect the health of our country without exposing infectious disease and etc. and such. While, like I said, Republicans were concerned about the fact of it being unfair to domestic people, since for many Americans, healthcare is not free unless you meet a series of conditions which make you eligible for Medicaid, or the fact that you are of 65 and above and can be on Medicare with you paying in over time. So I hope you all had a very good time watching this video. This is our first video, so I would apologize if there's any complications or mishaps in this video. I hope you like this video. I hope you subscribe, and be sure, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube, and also just subscribe to our Instagram, subscribe to our Twitter channel, and of course also our Discord. Join our Discord channel, which allows you to be able to participate in debates, ask us questions directly, be involved in making some of our videos as well, and also having commentary which we can later post on YouTube. So I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you all soon.